So unfortunately, the things we're going to cover in this lesson are common mistakes in the sense that once you begin looking out for these, I'm sure you're going to see them start popping up everywhere. Mainly, it will be local businesses, perhaps the local bakery, and it's made a few design mistakes. But every now and again, you'll actually see a larger or high profile brand that makes some amateur mistakes. Now, I'm not saying you have to read and memorize a whole book on type design before you're ready to make even simple changes. Although, if you do want to read a book on type design, this is my absolute favorite. It's Designing Type and it's by Karen Cheng. This will really teach you all of the hidden rules and nuances that make type look beautiful and make it professional. So if you have the time to study a book like that, fantastic, that will really improve your design. But in the meantime, there are just a few rules that you'll want to at least be aware of so that your logo design doesn't look wrong in some way. So as promised, we've returned to this piece of artwork and done the wrong way. There's a lot of mistakes that could be made here trying to balance these, to stitch together these different fonts used for these different characters. So first of all, let's look at this poor attempt to just manipulate the L. Now you can see in the original, which is from the original font, it has a certain profile and it's got a certain curve over a set space of time. It curves just like that. And when you try to extend that, even though if you zoom in and you were to look at the anchor points, they've got quite long transitions and there's no kinks in it. It just doesn't feel right. It feels very different to the profile of curves in the other characters, and it feels a little bit unnatural. Where the version we've stitched together below, although it comes from a different font, we've kept the profile, so it's got a more natural curve to it. And to kind of illustrate the difference, if we were manipulating something like the E from this font, so I'll just outline this. Let's highlight that, put it in a black so we can see a bit better. And if I just select the anchor points here and hit my arrow key a few times, we can quite easily elongate that, or we could make it a little narrower. If we wanted, we could select like this and just reduce the weight of the stem. So it's quite easy to make proportioned changes. And because we've selected the entire curve, this isn't changing the angles at all as we manipulate this. Now, there is a better way to edit and alter curves. We don't have time for it in this class as a quick tip, but just take care when you are manipulating curved portions. So this R, if you're manipulating this S, you can't simply grab the anchor points in the same way we did as the E and start stretching things, because you get these, even if it seems to follow the same form, it's very easy to get bumps or kinks. So it would be much better, and again, I'm not going to attempt to show you this right now, maybe we'll do this in a future class, but it would be much better to pull in a geometric shape and kind of position it and then subtract and add and use a geometric shape as a reference, so that you avoid those kind of kinks and uneasy, unnatural warps. So that's the first mistake to avoid. Another is consistent weight. Now, if we were manipulating this, you can see this has a little bit of a Didoni style, which is where some of the strokes have a thicker weight than others. But even where that's the case, we want to be consistent. So we can see the A and the V, one stroke has a certain weight and the other has a certain weight. But what would happen if Let's do this maybe with an easier character with an E. Let's select this. And what would happen if selected too much? If we did this so that the line at the bottom is heavier. Well, that just doesn't look balanced, and that shouldn't be done. Usually all of the horizontal strokes are even in width, or even in weight, I should say. And usually the horizontal, the stems, the strokes, they'll follow some kind of consistent weight. So you should ensure that something is either the weight of this stem here and here, or the weight of this one. But it shouldn't be something in between. And I'm going to lose my curve, I think, to try to manipulate this. But I can try to show you. I think I've got it there. Yes, if I bring this across, and let's say it was there. It's not a big difference perhaps, but that is now not consistent with the part it should match. The weight of this part of the A here and the weight of this part of the O. Now, how do we know this? Where do these rules come from? There are resources. There's the book I alluded to earlier. There are lots of rules that you can spend the time studying and learning if you want to. But an easy rule of thumb as you get started is to look for consistency. So try to follow the form of other characters, and particularly when it comes to weight, it should always match its partners. You should see a consistency in the widest weight and in the narrowest weight for a font. Next comes spacing. So we're going to jump over to this artboard, and this is a little technique I like to use to balance my spacing between characters. And if I just grab these placeholders and remove them, you'll see that looks quite well balanced. The spacing is consistent. And yes, you can achieve this just using your eye, but I like to put these placeholders down, and they use the golden ratio. They're quite close to rule of thirds as well. But you can see here, they kind of step up in line with the golden ratio. And so as long as a space it hits one of these points, one of these widths, then it should look pleasing to the eye. So the space here, it uses that width, which is the same as the space here and here. The smaller spaces are all the same, and you're taking into account, you know, a curve that I don't think makes a big enough difference for me to, for example, to move that whole line down there. I think you've got to use these as guides, but balance it optically, not metrically. You've got to some extent, trust your eyes. The space on the edge here, it could be that I used this. Let's just shrink this down and then rotate it in place. So it could be that I thought, let's use that spacer. But for me, that doesn't quite look balanced. I wanted it, because it's a wider logo than it is tall, I wanted to kind of reflect that form. So I wanted it to have a wider space there. And you can see that that space, this one, is almost exactly double the space it has above. So when there's a kind of math behind it, and you can read up more and use rule of thirds or use the golden ratio, it tends to also help you balance things out optically, and it feels pleasing. To show you how easily this could be done the wrong way, if I just select this and we don't give it enough space, you know, it can feel very tight and constrained, or if some of the spaces were large and then some of the spaces were small. So if we had perhaps a really small space at the sides. I mean, this is extreme. You'd have to to have quite a bad eye, I think, to position it that badly. But when you're trying to line elements up, I find that this really helps, and you can easily create these little guidelines for yourself. Another common mistake is mismatching fonts which don't necessarily pair well together. So this here, at first glance, it may look okay. I know there are similarities in the form. So we've got Serenity Light and All Round Gothic. But when they look this close together and they're different, it can look like a mistake. Contrast can be a good thing, and this can just look like someone's accidentally used the wrong font. If you use something that had a much, let's go to Lato, a much lighter weight, and maybe a very different form, then you get something more interesting. When it looks like you maybe accidentally mismatch fonts, it just confuses. It doesn't quite sit right. So I think sometimes going for contrast makes a better pairing than going for something that's similar but not close enough. There's another example where it's looking much better balanced. Here you can do something like this, but a script won't always work nicely with everything. You can't always run straight from a script into any other style of font. So this here I think is quite a bad pairing, even though we've tried to match up the size and the positioning. This doesn't flow very smoothly to me. So you want to look out for clashes where fonts look like they've been shoehorned together, but they don't quite share the same characteristics. They don't really flow together, or they don't contrast each other enough if it's on two different lines of type. And our last mistake to look out for is visually aligning rather than geometrically aligning. And you may not notice this has already been done to many of the fonts you're using. These are not geometrically aligned. If you look at VV, if you look at VA, I've added some lines here to show you, they actually stick way over the baseline and the cap height. The O, because it has a curve, we often have the same. So when we zoom out and we look at that type, it looks balanced, but we couldn't trust our eyes. And if you did reduce the O and the V so that they were sitting perfectly along that baseline or the cap height, then it would seem like they were too small, because our eyes make those smaller elements shrink. Where you've got something coming to a point, it seems to be smaller, and where you've got a curve, especially a thin curve like this, it seems to shrink to our eyes. This is an even more obvious example. This is using the font Futura, and here you can really see that this almost looks badly misaligned when you zoom in, but when you look at that from a distance or at lighter weights, it's properly balanced. Now this is where, if you decided to use this font, which they've balanced so that at very small sizes it reads okay. If you decide you're going to use it, at this kind of size, and you've got this obvious tip of the end sticking out, well, this is where you might want to, to address that, to manipulate it so that it suits your purposes and it suits the size you'll be using it at. So you might decide you need to manipulate or trim that. If we outline the type, you'd have to take great care as you do this, and this could be another mistake. If you select those anchor points and just drag them up to those baselines, you've now actually changed the angle. If I copy just that character, and we'll go back, and then I'll superimpose it in a different color, you can see you've actually changed the angle of the N. So that might not be a problem, but again, something to be aware of. When you begin manipulating type, you've got to really pay attention to the balancing. So as you've probably realized, to improve further, you really want to practice and familiarize yourself with the anatomy of type, the components that form it, and a lot of the nuances that make type appear balanced, and these little rules you could accidentally break if you're not careful. So you can download, if you want, this quick reference guide that I've created. This is in the class resources, and this just helps get you familiar with the different components of type. And the more you practice, and there's lots of more in-depth tutorials out there, you can begin to, to safely make some pretty extreme manipulations and keep the form, keep the balance as you do that. As with most things in life, practice makes perfect. And the more you begin closely looking at type, understanding how and why it's been designed in a certain way, the better your design will become and the better positioned you'll be to safely manipulate type to suit your needs.